A crash of glass shattered the hush of Ashcombe Hall. Lady Eleanor swept through the corridor, her emerald skirt slicing the shadows, heart thundering with rage and disbelief. She scarcely felt the cold marble beneath her slippered feet as she flung open the library doors, her voice ringing sharp and clear. "Who are you? What are you doing in my father's study?" A stranger stood by the tall windows, moonlight sketching his broad shoulders in silver. In one hand, he held a faded architectural drawing. His clothes, though neat, were plain a stark contrast to the gold-embroidered draperies and the gleaming mahogany around him. His dark hair fell untidily across his brow, and his eyes, steady and unflinching, met hers. He did not flinch as Eleanor advanced. "I am Jonathan Harrow," he said, voice low, resonant. "Your father requested my expertise, My father is dead." Eleanor's words cut the air. "Whatever business you had with him died as well. Leave this house at once, or I shall summon the constable." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "I assure you, Lady Ashcombe, I'm not here as a thief. I was summoned regarding the estate's foundation." Your father was gravely concerned. "How dare you speak of my father as if you knew him?" Eleanor's hands trembled, fists clenched at her sides. "I find you rifling through his papers and expect me to believe you are here on honest business. You have no right. No right at all." From the doorway, Mrs. Temple, the housekeeper, hovered, pale and anxious. "My lady, if I may, Mr. Harrow was here last autumn with the late Duke. They spent many hours in this room." "Enough," Eleanor snapped, her gaze never leaving the stranger. "If there was any arrangement, let it be proven. Until then, sir, you are a trespasser in my home." Jonathan's eyes flashed with something unspoken pride, perhaps, or pain. "The house is in peril, Lady Ashcombe. I came to warn you." "Warn me?" Eleanor's laughter was brittle. "You presume much. I will not be threatened in my own home. Get out of this house." He set the drawing gently on the desk, his hands steady. "As you wish, my lady." His gaze lingered on her, an intensity in his eyes that unsettled her, more than she cared to admit. He strode past her, boots echoing over the stone. Behind her, a murmur of voices. The footman, Thomas, whispered, "I remember him, my lady." The master trusted him. Eleanor would not hear it. She pressed her hand to her chest, fighting for composure as the household gathered, uncertain and uneasy. Minutes later, in the withdrawing room, Mr. Carstairs, the family lawyer, arrived at Eleanor's urgent summons. His spectacles glinted as he leafed through his papers. "It is as Mr. Harrow says, Lady Ashcombe. The late Duke engaged him for an assessment of the estate's foundations. There are letters here, see?" He produced a page, her father's handwriting unmistakable. Eleanor stared at the words, shame warring with indignation. "Why was I not told?" Carstairs hesitated. "Your father wished to spare you worry after his illness. He said you had enough burdens." Eleanor's spine stiffened. "That may be, but this is my house now. I decide who crosses its threshold." She dismissed Carstairs and the staff, her decision absolute. The echo of her own voice haunted her as she watched Jonathan Harrow's figure recede down the drive, shoulders squared, face unreadable. Night deepened. In her chamber, Eleanor paced before the dying fire, skirts whispering over the rug. The events replayed in her mind, the certainty in Jonathan's eyes, the conviction in his voice. Was she wrong? Had she acted too rashly? The door creaked, and her aunt, Lady Rosalind, entered, followed by Lady Marianne, Eleanor's dearest childhood friend. Lady Rosalind's expression was grave, her silver hair swept up with customary precision. "My dear, your temper is a sword you wield too freely," Rosalind said gently. "You have your father's pride, but not his patience." Marianne took Eleanor's hand. "People are watching, Ellie. Society loves nothing more than to whisper about a duchess who cannot control her household. You must be careful. Your name is your greatest asset." Eleanor pulled her hand free, chin high. "I did what I must to protect this family. I will not have strangers lurking in the shadows of my father's house." Rosalind's gaze softened. "Sometimes, Eleanor, the shadows conceal more than threats. They may hold answers." Alone at last, Eleanor stood by the window, staring into the moonlit gardens. Somewhere beyond the hedgerows, Jonathan Harrow vanished into the night. and with him, perhaps, the truth she most feared to discover. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the panes, as if carrying a warning she was not yet ready to hear. Sunlight slanted across the marble floors of Ashcombe Hall, but its warmth did not reach Eleanor's heart. She sat in her father's study, spine rigid as Mr. Hargreaves, the family solicitor, fussed with a battered leather case. His spectacles perched precariously on his nose, he extracted a letter with slow ceremony. "Lady Ashcombe," he said, offering the page with trembling hands, "this was entrusted to me by your father. It concerns Mr. Harrow's engagement." Eleanor's eyes narrowed as she scanned the familiar looping script. Her father's words, so recently silenced by death, leapt from the page. "Harrow alone understands the faults in the West Wing. I trust him. Give him your cooperation. The safety of the house depends upon it." A chill prickled Eleanor's skin. She folded the letter, her jaw tight. "Very well. If that is my father's wish, Mr. Harrow may return. But he is to confine himself to his work, nothing more." As if conjured by her words, Jonathan appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, posture stiff. Mr. Hargreaves gave a satisfied nod, ushering him inside. "Mr. Harrow, the late Duke's wishes are clear. You are to resume your work. Lady Ashcombe will be your point of contact." Jonathan's gaze flicked to Eleanor, searching her face for welcome or warning. She offered neither, only the cool formality of a duchess. "You may begin your survey at once. I expect daily reports, and you will address any concerns directly to me. Is that understood?" He bowed, his voice measured. "Perfectly, my lady." They passed each other in the corridors with the brittle politeness of adversaries forced to share the same ground. Eleanor watched as Jonathan paced the West Wing, his hands running along ancient plaster, his brow furrowed in concentration. He carried a battered leather satchel, the tools within clinking softly, a music that grated on Eleanor's nerves. Whispers circulated among the servants. In the kitchen, cook confided to Mrs. Temple, "Strange, isn't it, him being back? The late Duke trusted him. But what do we know of his people?" Thomas, the footman, recalled Jonathan's kindness to the stable boys, but others muttered darkly about his accent, his origins. Some insisted he was the son of a tradesman, others whispered of scandal. Through it all, Jonathan remained silent, unyielding, his dignity a shield against curiosity and scorn. Eleanor's mother, the Dowager Duchess, summoned her to the morning room. The Dowager's gaze was sharp, her black silk dress severe against the sunlight. "Eleanor," she said, "your duty is clear. The estate's future is not secured by sentiment or stubbornness. You must consider your prospects soon. I have invited Lord Weatherby for tea, and Sir Rupert dines with us this week. Both are excellent matches." Eleanor's lips pressed into a line. "You forget, Mamma, that I am still in mourning." "Mourning ends, responsibility does not," the Dowager replied, her tone brooking no argument. "We must think of Ashcombe's future. I expect you to do your part." The parade of suitors began. Lord Weatherby, a florid man with a booming laugh, regaled the drawing room with tales of his hounds, heedless of Eleanor's wan smile. Sir Rupert, thin and exacting, quizzed her on estate revenues and the yield of the orchards. Each guest seemed more pompous than the last, their eyes lingering not on Eleanor, but on the gilded panels and ancient tapestries that spoke of her inheritance. Jonathan's presence, though silent, unsettled her. He appeared in the background taking measurements, conferring quietly with the steward, scribbling notes. Once, as Eleanor endured Lord Weatherby's endless monologue, she caught Jonathan's gaze across the room. There was no mockery in his eyes, only a grave understanding that pricked at her pride. Their encounters, though brief, crackled with tension. In the morning room, Eleanor found Jonathan reviewing blueprints spread across her father's desk. "You are in my way, Mr. Harrow." He did not look up. "The wall behind you is buckling. I must record the damage. Be quick about it then. I have letters to write." He gathered his papers with quiet efficiency, yet as he passed, she caught the scent of soap and fresh air, unmistakably out of place among the heavy perfumes and musty tomes. It unsettled her more than she cared to admit. One afternoon, as Eleanor strode through the stable yard, she heard a commotion near the tack room. A stable boy, little more than a child, sat on the ground, clutching a bloodied arm. The head groom barked orders, impatient and gruff. Jonathan knelt beside the boy, voice low and gentle. Let me see. He cleaned the wound with water from the trough, binding it with a handkerchief. You'll be mending in no time. Tell Mrs. Temple to find you a poultice. The boy's eyes shone with gratitude. Thank you, sir. Eleanor watched, unnoticed, a strange warmth blooming in her chest. It was not in Jonathan's words, but in the way he listened, the carefulness of his hands. Another day. She overheard voices rising in the servants' corridor. Cook and the new scullery maid, Molly, quarreled over broken china, their tempers fraying. Jonathan interceded, his tone calm but firm. It was an accident. Molly's new, and Cook, you know how heavy the plates are. Let it rest. Cook grumbled, but the storm passed. Molly murmured her thanks, eyes downcast. Eleanor lingered in the shadow of the archway, her opinion of Jonathan shifting in spite of herself. He moved through the world with quiet integrity, never seeking favor, never demanding thanks. The next evening another suitor arrived, Sir Basil Fenwick, whose boasts of investments and racing horses made Eleanor's head ache. She endured dinner with measured civility, her mind drifting to the West Wing, to the sound of Jonathan's footsteps echoing in empty halls. Afterward, in the gallery, Eleanor paused before a portrait of her father. The painted eyes seemed to reproach her. Was she truly protecting his legacy, or only her pride? Behind her, Jonathan's voice, soft but steady. The foundation must be repaired within the year, or the wing may collapse. I have drawn up a plan. She turned, startled. You presume I will accept your advice after everything? I offer only what is necessary, he replied, meeting her gaze. Your father trusted me. I wish to honor that. Eleanor studied him, his worn coat, the ink stains on his fingers, the steadiness in his eyes. You do not belong here, she whispered. He inclined his head. Neither do I wish to, my lady, but I will do what must be done. For a moment, neither spoke. The tension between them was not hostility, but something deeper, an unspoken challenge, a recognition of equals. Rumors continued to swirl below stairs, but Eleanor found herself listening less. She watched Jonathan instead, learning the cadence of his stride, the care with which he mapped the faults in her ancestral home. Each accidental meeting chipped away at her certainty, leaving questions in its place. As another day faded, Eleanor stood at her window, the sky streaked with violet and gold. She saw Jonathan crossing the lawn, coat slung over his shoulder, head bowed in thought. She pressed her palm to the cold glass, her mind restless, her heart uncertain. Below, in the gathering dusk, Jonathan paused and looked back at the house, as if sensing her gaze. For a fleeting moment, Eleanor wondered if the future she had been taught to fear might hold something wholly unexpected. In the silence, the faintest crack appeared in the walls of her resolve, just enough for hope or ruin to slip through. And as the shadows lengthened across Ashcombe Hall, neither Eleanor nor Jonathan could guess how quickly the world they knew would change. The crash of hammers and low murmur of men's voices signaled the start of restoration at Ashcombe Hall's west wing. Dust hung in the air, catching in the sunlight that filtered through cracked window panes. Lady Eleanor strode across the flagged floor, skirts brushing against stray lengths of timber. Her chin was high, her expression resolute as she surveyed the controlled chaos with the air of a general reviewing her troops. Jonathan stood at the center of it all, coat flung over a chair, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. He directed workers with calm authority, consulting his battered sketchbook between instructions. When Eleanor entered, conversation faltered, eyes flickering between their lady and the architect she had once banished. We agreed the cornice moldings would be preserved, Eleanor began, her voice clipped. Jonathan did not look up from his plans. The cornices are unsound. If we do not reinforce them, they will collapse. My proposal allows for their preservation, but safety must come first. You would strip this house of everything that gives it character, she retorted. My father valued tradition. And yet, the West Wing is crumbling, Jonathan replied, his tone even but unyielding. You may keep the gilding, my lady, but not at the expense of your staff's lives. Eleanor's cheeks flushed. You presume to lecture me about my own home? Jonathan met her gaze, unwavering. If you will not hear reason, I cannot help you. Their disputes became the rhythm of the days. In the mornings, they walked the halls together, Jonathan pointing out faults in the masonry, Eleanor arguing for the preservation of painted ceilings and carved balustrades. Sometimes their voices rose, sharp as the scent of fresh plaster. Yet beneath the sparring, something shifted. Eleanor found herself waiting for Jonathan's opinions, grudgingly admiring the clarity of his vision. He, in turn, was surprised by her fierce intelligence, her refusal to be cowed by adversity or social expectation. One afternoon, as rain drummed against the windows, they stood beneath the great staircase poring over a set of blueprints. "We could reinforce the landing here," Jonathan said, tapping the paper, "but the cost will be considerable." Eleanor frowned, calculating. "I will not allow the staircase to be replaced. It is the heart of the house." He hesitated. "Perhaps a compromise. We keep the original structure but discreetly add steel supports. No one will notice." She looked up at him, surprised. "You would allow such a thing?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Even I am not immune to sentiment, Lady Ashcombe." Their eyes held for a moment too long, the air thick with something unspoken. Then, as always, they retreated into the safe armor of duty. As spring crept over the grounds, Eleanor's burdens multiplied. The estate's accounts, already precarious, grew more dire. Each day brought fresh invoices. Stone, timber, wages for masons and laborers. The household silver was sent for polishing and never returned. The kitchen garden was stretched to feed the growing number of mouths. Her mother's warnings echoed. A duchess cannot live on pride alone. Suitors came and went, but the family's hopes narrowed to one, Lord Percival. Wealthy, arrogant, and odious, he courted Eleanor with overblown compliments and sly remarks about Ashcombe's faded grandeur. The Dowager Duchess pressed her daughter relentlessly. "Percival will restore what your father squandered. Do not let your pride destroy us." Eleanor felt trapped, her father's legacy slipping through her fingers, her own desires buried beneath duty and expectation. One evening, unable to endure another hour of strained conversation in the drawing room, Eleanor escaped into the gardens. The moon hung low, painting the lawns silver. She wandered aimlessly, the hush of night pressing in on all sides. Rounding a hedge, she halted. There, on a stone bench beneath the old yew, sat Jonathan, sketchbook in hand. He did not notice her at first, utterly absorbed in his work. The lamplight beside him cast his features in gentle relief, the furrow of concentration, the quiet grace of his hands. For a moment, Eleanor simply watched, her anger forgotten. The drawing on his page was Ashcombe itself, rendered with such tenderness it nearly took her breath away. She spoke softly. "You see it differently than I do." Jonathan started, closing the sketchbook hastily. "My apologies, my lady. I did not mean." She shook her head. "No, it is beautiful. You love this place." He hesitated, then nodded. "I suppose I do. It is more than stone and timber. It is memory, hope, a kind of promise." Eleanor sat beside him, the distance between them fragile. "I was raised to believe this house was everything. But lately, I fear I am losing it, piece by piece." Jonathan's gaze softened. "You are not alone in that. I have lost more than bricks and mortar in my life." She looked at him, surprised by the note of pain in his voice. "What did you lose?" He stared into the darkness. "My family. My father died when I was a boy, my mother not long after. I learned early that nothing lasts, not houses, not happiness. I suppose that is why I fight so hard to preserve what can be saved." For a moment, Eleanor's composure slipped. "I miss my father every day. He was the only one who believed I could manage this place. Now it feels as though everyone is waiting for me to fail." Jonathan's voice was gentle. "You have not failed, Lady Ashcombe. You have fought for this house harder than any man might have done." Their eyes met, vulnerability shimmering in the quiet. The night pressed closer, and Eleanor felt for the first time the ache of longing and the solace of understanding. She rose, smoothing her skirt. "We should return. There is much to do." He nodded, rising as well. "Yes, my lady." They walked back to the house in silence, a new, fragile bond stretching between them. Yet by morning, both had retreated behind the familiar masks of formality and duty. Eleanor ordered the repairs with renewed vigor. Jonathan supervised the workers with his usual reserve. The memory of that night lingered, unspoken but alive. The pressure from Eleanor's family did not relent. The Dowager Duchess arranged yet another dinner, seating Lord Percival at Eleanor's right hand. The conversation was a parade of veiled threats and ostentatious offers. "You cannot maintain a house of this size without substantial means," Percival said, voice oily. "It would be a shame to see Ashcombe fall to ruin. I could be of service." Eleanor's smile was brittle. "Ashcombe has survived worse than neglect. But has it survived mismanagement?" Percival pressed. "Forgive me, my lady, but you cannot expect to shoulder this burden alone." Jonathan, standing discreetly at the far end of the hall, watched the exchange with an expression that revealed nothing. Yet when Eleanor caught his eye, something passed between them. A flicker of defiance, a shared understanding of what was truly at stake. After dinner, as Eleanor paced the empty gallery, her thoughts churned. Ashcombe's future was slipping from her grasp, and every path seemed barred. She pressed her forehead to the cool window pane, the voices of her ancestors whispering through the halls. In the garden below, Jonathan's lantern moved among the shadows, steady and unwavering. For the first time, Eleanor wondered whether her greatest battle was not for the house, but for the right to choose her own happiness. Outside, spring winds rattled the windows, promising change. And within Ashcombe's ancient walls, new tensions and new desires began to take root, unseen but impossible to ignore. Ashcombe Hall glittered beneath 1,000 candles, its chandeliers casting gold across the marble floors and silk-draped walls. Music soared from the quartet in the gallery, and the scent of white lilies mingled with beeswax and perfume. The west wing, newly shored and cautiously opened for the first time in years, gleamed with a veneer of prosperity that belied the anxious thrum beneath Eleanor's ribs. She stood at the top of the grand staircase, a vision in ivory satin, every curl and jewel in place, her every movement watched by the assembled elite. It was the grandest ball Ashcombe had seen in years. Gentry and financiers from across the county had come, lured by rumors of the estate's need and its heiress's hand. Eleanor's mother had arranged every detail, from the imported ices to the footman's new livery. All was meant to dazzle, to convince, to save. Yet Eleanor felt as if she were a statue, hollowed out and set on display. Suitors circled, offering practiced compliments, their eyes weighing the house as much as the woman. Lord Percival was never far from her side, his smile a polished leer. "A triumph, Lady Ashcombe," he murmured as they led the first waltz. "Your devotion to your family's legacy is inspiring." Eleanor offered a perfunctory smile, her gaze drifting beyond the crowd. The music spun her away, past clusters of ladies in peacock silks, gentlemen with gleaming studs and bored expressions, and finally, past the edge of the great room where the servants moved silently, refilling glasses and replacing soiled napkins. Jonathan stood among them, his dark coat marking him as staff. He had come at the Dowager's insistence to oversee the safety of the West Wing and attend to any emergency. Now, he lingered by the doors, observing the festivities with unreadable eyes. His hair was neatly combed, his hands clean, but the line of his shoulders was stiff, and his jaw set in a way that betrayed discomfort. As the evening wore on, the distinction between guest and servant sharpened. Some of the young lords, emboldened by champagne and arrogance, noticed Jonathan's presence. Lord Wetherby, flushed and loud, nudged Sir Rupert. "What's this, Ashcombe's resident mason at the ball? Perhaps he'll teach us how to lay bricks between dances." Laughter rippled, brittle as glass. Sir Basil added, "Or perhaps Lady Ashcombe means to marry beneath her station. Such a modern duchess." The ridicule grew, too quiet for most to hear, but not for Eleanor, whose senses were attuned to every shift in the air. She saw the way Jonathan's eyes flashed, the slight tightening of his fists. He turned away, intent on his duties, but the sting of their words lingered. Eleanor's cheeks burned with a mix of shame and anger. For the first time, she saw the cruelty of her world, laid bare not just to Jonathan, but to herself. When the quadrille ended, Eleanor excused herself from Lord Percival, who immediately began calculating how her absence might be turned to his advantage with other guests. She crossed the ballroom, head high, ignoring the flutter of fans and the widened eyes of matrons who marked every breach of etiquette. Jonathan was in the hall, conferring with a footman about a draught from an upper window. Eleanor approached, her heart pounding. The hush that fell as she stopped at Jonathan's side was instantaneous, as if the entire assembly had drawn breath and held it. "Mr. Harrow," she said, her voice clear, "have you a moment?" Jonathan straightened, searching her face for mockery or warning. "Yes, my lady. Would you advise me, please, about the condition of the windows in the West Gallery? There is a chill in the air. I would not have our guest discomforted." He hesitated, then inclined his head. "At once, Lady Ashcombe." They walked together down the corridor, the murmurs behind them swelling like a rising tide. Eleanor felt exposed, but also strangely free. For one brief, charged moment, their eyes met, and something unspoken gratitude, perhaps, or solidarity, flared between them. "Thank you," Jonathan said quietly when they reached the end of the hall. Eleanor's breath caught. "You should not have to endure their scorn. This is your home too, in its way." His lips twisted in a sad smile. "Ashcombe is yours, my lady. I am merely a guest, or perhaps an intruder." She shook her head, but before she could answer, footsteps echoed behind them. A maid, come to summon Jonathan to some minor crisis. He bowed, and she watched him go, her pulse thrumming with confusion and something dangerously close to hope. The night pressed on. Dancers spun, laughter swelled, and the storm outside gathered unseen. By midnight, clouds blotted out the moon, and the first boom of thunder rattled the panes. Guests began to murmur uneasily, glancing at the windows where rain streaked in silver torrents. The wind rose, shrieking around the eaves. Suddenly, a crash reverberated through the house. A servant rushed in, breathless. "My lady, the west wing! The storm's torn open the roof above the long gallery. Rain is pouring in." Eleanor did not hesitate. She gathered her skirts and ran, heedless of her mother's cries. At the foot of the stairs, she collided with Jonathan, already moving toward the danger. "Stay back, my lady," he said, voice urgent. "I will not," she replied, matching his stride. "There are paintings, tapestries, my father's journals. If the rain reaches them, they'll be lost." They raced through the warren of corridors, the air thick with dust and panic. Water streamed from the ceiling in the west gallery, pooling on the floor, running in rivulets down the walls. Wind howled through the gaping hole in the roof, scattering leaves and shards of glass. Jonathan barked orders to the footman. "Move the portrait's first lift, do not drag. Cover everything with oilcloths. Careful, that table is French." Eleanor joined the effort, her dress sodden, hair clinging to her neck. She seized a stack of ledgers, clutching them to her chest as she waded through ankle-deep water. A priceless tapestry sagged from the wall, its colors bleeding. She reached for it, but Jonathan was there first, steadying her with one hand as he rescued the fabric with the other. Their eyes met, wild and breathless in the lamplight. "You'll ruin your gown," he said, a half-smile breaking through the chaos. "I have others," she replied, voice shaking with adrenaline. "But there is only one Ashcombe." They worked side by side, heedless of rank or propriety, soaked to the skin. Jonathan hauled a heavy trunk away from the leaking window. Eleanor dragged a pile of books to safety. Together, they shielded the great Ashcombe portrait, maneuvering it into the relative safety of the corridor. In the eye of the storm, they found a strange exhilaration, beyond class, beyond duty, united in the desperate work of saving what mattered. Hours later, as the wind died and the first pale light crept into the ravaged gallery, they sank onto a battered settee, too exhausted to stand. Eleanor's hands shook as she brushed wet hair from her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I could not have done it without you." Jonathan's breath was ragged. "It was your courage, not mine, that saved this house tonight." She turned to him, the barriers between them washed away. "Why do you stay, Jonathan? Why endure all this scorn, hardship, when you could leave?" He hesitated, pain flickering across his face. "Because Ashcombe is worth saving. Because you—" He stopped, searching her eyes. "Because I believe in what this place could be, in your hands." For a moment, Eleanor's heart pounded with the urge to say what she had buried for weeks. Admiration, respect, something more. Her lips parted, words trembling on the brink. But then, her mother's voice, sharp and insistent, pierced the hush. Eleanor, what on earth are you doing? You are drenched, child. Come away at once. Eleanor sprang to her feet, the spell broken. She glanced at Jonathan, regret and longing warring in her gaze. He managed a small nod, understanding and resignation mingling in his eyes. As her mother swept her away, Eleanor looked back over her shoulder. The ruined gallery, the battered treasures, the man who had stood beside her in the storm, all haunted her steps. In the silence that followed, as dawn crept over the battered halls of Ashcombe, Eleanor's heart ached with questions she dared not name. And somewhere within the battered walls, hope flickered, fragile and persistent, waiting for its chance to grow. Ashcombe Hall lay in uneasy silence, its grand rooms echoing with the aftermath of storm and scandal. In drawing rooms across the county, tongues wagged with renewed fervor. Whispers of Lady Eleanor's public exchange with Jonathan Harrow at the ball were embellished, sharpened, and carried on the wind like a plague. Brazen, declared Lady Fenwick, sipping her tea. Unbecoming for a duchess. He is but a tradesman, hissed another. She risks everything her name, her fortune for a fleeting fancy. Within her own home, Eleanor felt the change acutely. Invitations dwindled. Old friends found themselves indisposed. Even the servants eyed her with a blend of awe and unease, their deference tinged with wary curiosity. The great house, once a fortress of tradition, now seemed a gilded cage. The Dowager Duchess wasted no time. On a grim morning thick with fog, she summoned Eleanor to her private sitting room. The air was heavy with rosewater and disapproval. "You have brought this house to the brink of ruin," her mother began, her voice cold and precise. "Ashcombe's reputation is in tatters. Do you understand what you have done?" Eleanor stood tall, but her heart hammered in her chest. "I have done nothing shameful, Mamma. I merely spoke to a man who has saved this house more times than I can count." The dowager's eyes flashed. "It is not enough to be virtuous, Eleanor. You must appear so. The world will not forgive a duchess who consorts with servants. I will not forgive it." A brittle silence settled. Eleanor lifted her chin, clinging to dignity. "What would you have me do?" Her mother drew a breath, then delivered the words like a sentence. "You will accept Lord Percival's proposal. At once, it is the only way. Refuse, and Ashcombe will be lost sold piece by piece to pay the debts your father left behind. I will not remain to watch our name disgraced." Eleanor's throat closed. "You would see me unhappy trapped in a loveless marriage for the sake of appearances." "For the sake of your birthright," the dowager snapped. "For the sake of your father's legacy. There is no other path." Eleanor left the room numb, the ultimatum ringing in her ears. Duty pressed down on her like a stone, threatening to crush every fragile hope she had dared to entertain. Jonathan sensed the change before Eleanor could voice it. Where once their paths had crossed daily over blueprints, in the gardens, beneath the battered eaves, now he kept his distance. He arrived early, leaving before breakfast was served. In the evenings, she saw him only at a distance, conferring with the steward or overseeing repairs with a grim, single-minded determination. She missed him more than she could say. The house felt emptier for his absence. Her days longer and colder. She found herself seeking out the traces he left behind. A half-finished sketch on the library table, a coat forgotten on a bench, the echo of his laughter in the west wing. One afternoon, as the sun broke through the clouds, Eleanor wandered the gardens, hoping by chance to find him. Instead, she encountered Marianne, whose eyes took in her friend's pale face and restless hands with quiet concern. "Eleanor," Marianne said gently, "you cannot go on like this. You must speak to him." Eleanor shook her head, voice barely above a whisper. "It is impossible. The world is already against me. My mother will see me married to Lord Percival, or cast out entirely. I cannot bear the thought of bringing shame to Ashcombe." Marianne caught her hand. "You speak of duty as if it is all you are. What of your heart? Have you forgotten how to listen to it?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "My heart has no place in this world, Marianne. If I defy them, I lose everything. Not everything, Marianne pressed. Only what was never truly yours. Ashcombe is stone and memory. Your happiness is flesh and blood. Do not let them take it from you. The words lingered long after Marianne was gone, echoing in the silent corridors of Eleanor's mind. Meanwhile, Jonathan labored with a new ferocity, as if he could wall himself off from disappointment with bricks and mortar. The prospect of hope between them seemed to recede each day, replaced by the practicalities of survival. Yet at night, when all was quiet, he would pause beneath the window of Eleanor's chamber, longing for a glimpse of her candle, a sign that she too was awake and restless. It was Lord Percival who forced matters to a head. One evening, he arrived with a flourish, bearing a letter sealed with a city crest. He found Jonathan in the old study, poring over repair accounts. "Mr. Harrow," Percival said, his voice oily, "I have taken the liberty of recommending you for a most distinguished position, a commission in London, under Sir Henry Forster. The project is of national importance. I imagine you will find the offer generous." Jonathan's face betrayed nothing, but his hands curled into fists. "Why would you do this, my lord?" Percival smiled thinly. "Your talents are wasted here, and Lady Ashcombe, well, her future lies elsewhere. It is time you thought of your own." Jonathan's jaw worked. "I see. Sir Henry awaits your reply," Percival finished, placing the letter on the desk. "I suggest you do not keep him waiting." When Jonathan was alone, he stared at the letter for a long time, his mind churning. The offer was tempting, more than he had ever dreamed. Yet it felt like exile, a door closing with finality. The next morning, Eleanor received the news from Mrs. Temple, who brought the matter with trembling lips. "They say Mr. Harrow is leaving, my lady." For London. The staff are beside themselves. Eleanor's world narrowed to a single cold point. She moved through the day in a daze, her tasks meaningless, her thoughts in turmoil. She glimpsed Jonathan only once, striding across the lawn, the letter tucked into his pocket. Their eyes met, and in that brief moment, 1,000 words passed: sorrow, longing, regret, and resignation. That night, unable to bear the silence, Eleanor sat before her father's portrait, tears spilling down her cheeks. She remembered Jonathan's steady hands, his quiet strength, the way he had seen her not as a duchess, but as herself. The ache in her chest was sharper than any fear of scandal, more real than any legacy. As dawn crept over Ashcombe, Eleanor rose, resolve hardening in her heart. She had sacrificed too much already. The world might condemn her, her mother might cast her out, but her happiness was hers alone to claim or to lose. And even as Jonathan prepared to leave, a single fragile hope remained. One last chance for courage, before the clock ran out for both of them. Rain hammered the windows of Ashcombe Hall, a relentless drumming that seeped into Eleanor's bones. The house felt smaller than ever, every corridor echoing with the whispers of duty and the louder, crueler rumors that swirled like smoke in the village. She moved through the morning as if underwater signing bills she barely read, offering clipped responses to the staff, her thoughts caught in a vice of dread and longing. By noon, the storm outside had worsened. In the drawing room, Lord Percival waited with the smug composure of a man certain of his triumph. He wore his best cravat, his smile practiced and predatory. The Dowager Duchess hovered, her presence a silent warning. "Lady Ashcombe," Lord Percival began, rising as Eleanor entered, "it is time we dispensed with uncertainty. I ask for your hand in marriage, and with it, the promise to restore Ashcombe to its rightful place. I believe you will not refuse me." The words echoed in the hush. Eleanor's heart thudded painfully. Her mother's gaze was cold, unyielding. There was no mention of love, only rescue, only reputation. She managed to nod once curtly. "I must have time to consider, my lord." Percival's lips curled. "Do not tarry long. The world waits for your answer." She fled the room, pulse racing, and only then did she hear the quiet voice of Mrs. Temple at her elbow. "Mr. Harrow is leaving, my lady. He departs before the week's end." Eleanor's composure cracked. She had known, of course had seen the letter, the distance in Jonathan's eyes, but the finality of it left her breathless. She could not say where her feet carried her, only that she moved, skirts trailing, through empty halls until she reached the west wing. The air was cool and sharp with plaster dust. Scaffolding loomed in the half-light, the bones of Ashcombe exposed. Eleanor found Jonathan by a gaping window, bent over a crate of tools, his jaws set in grim determination. He straightened as she approached, surprise flickering in his eyes before he masked it with formality. "My lady." She could barely speak for the knot in her throat. "You are leaving?" Without a word, he set down the chisel with care. "There seemed little point in farewells. My presence here is no longer welcome." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "Not by my order." Jonathan's eyes darkened. "You are to marry Lord Percival. It is settled." "Is that what you believe?" Eleanor's anger flared, sudden and bright. "That I would surrender everything myself because it is easy." He laughed, the sound harsh. "You speak of surrender, but you do not know what it means. I have seen you fight for this house, for your name, but never for yourself." She took a step forward, hands clenched. "You think I do not want to? That I do not dream of another life?" He met her gaze, pain etched across his face. "Then why not reach for it? Why hide behind duty, behind your father's memory, behind these crumbling walls? You are braver than you know, Eleanor, but you are a prisoner of your own making." She felt as if he had struck her. "You have no right." "I have every right," he cut in, voice raw. "Because I—" He stopped, words catching. Eleanor's breath came in shallow bursts. "Because you what, Jonathan?" He turned away, running a hand through his hair, the storm outside matching the one in his eyes. "Because I care for you, more than I ought, more than is wise, and I cannot watch you destroy yourself for a name and a fortune that has given you nothing but sorrow." Silence yawned between them, vast and charged. Eleanor's tears spilled, unbidden. "You are a coward, Jonathan Harrow. You run because you are afraid." He turned back to her, something wild and desperate in his gaze. "And you, Eleanor Ashcombe, are afraid to stay." The words hung, trembling between them. The wind rattled the scaffold, and the air was thick with the smell of rain and longing. "I cannot bear it," she whispered, "to lose you, not after everything." Jonathan closed the distance in 2 strides. Before she could think, before she could protest, his hands cupped her face and his mouth found hers, urgent, searching, desperate. The world fell away. There was no Ashcombe, no Percival, no past or future, only the fierce truth of his kiss and the answering fire in her blood. For a moment, time stopped. Eleanor melted into him, her hands clutching his shirt, her tears mingling with the rain that seeped through the broken window. The kiss was everything she had never dared to want. Fierce, forbidden, honest. They broke apart, breathing ragged. Jonathan's eyes were stunned, almost afraid. Eleanor staggered back, pressing a trembling hand to her lips. "What have we done?" she gasped. He reached for her, but she jerked away, shame and terror flooding her senses. "I cannot, Jonathan, I cannot!" She fled, skirts trailing, heart pounding, leaving him alone in the half-built ruin, the taste of her still on his lips and the echo of her words ringing in his ears. Jonathan stood motionless, the storm raging around him, hope and despair warring in his chest. He pressed a fist to his heart, willing himself not to follow her, not to beg for what he could never rightfully claim. Word of their encounter, wild and distorted, swept through Ashcombe by nightfall. A scullery maid, spying Eleanor's hasty retreat from the west wing, whispered to the footman. By morning the village was alive with scandal. Lady Ashcombe in the arms of her architect, they said. A love affair to bring down a house. The rumors grew with each telling, growing ever more lurid, reaching the ears of the dowager and every matron for miles. Eleanor locked herself in her chamber, face buried in her hands, her mind a whirl of fear, longing, and shame. She remembered the heat of Jonathan's touch, the truth in his eyes. She remembered, too, the weight of her family's expectation, the threat of disgrace, the certainty of ruin. Below stairs, Jonathan packed his satchel in silence. He left instructions for the workmen, his sketches and plans neatly bundled. Each item he placed in his bag felt like a stone in his chest. He paused only once to trace the rough plaster where Eleanor's hand had rested, then forced himself to walk away. The village gossiped, the household braced for disaster, and Ashcombe Hall stood on the brink, its future uncertain, its fate bound to two hearts at war with themselves. And as the rain finally ceased and the first pale sunlight crept through the battered west wing, neither Eleanor nor Jonathan could know that the true storm had only just begun. The morning after the rumors broke, Ashcombe Hall was a fortress of ice. The Dowager Duchess's rage reverberated through its halls, chilling every servant and silencing even the boldest tongue. Eleanor, summoned before breakfast, found her mother waiting in the blue salon, her figure rigid as a statue, her eyes hard as winter glass. "You have disgraced us," the Dowager hissed, thrusting a crumpled letter into Eleanor's trembling hands, an anonymous account of what had transpired in the West Wing. "How dare you bring shame to your father's house? You are to have no further contact with that man. You are forbidden even to speak his name." Eleanor stood her ground, though her knees threatened to buckle. "It was never my intention to—" "Enough!" her mother cut her off. "You are confined to your chambers until further notice. Mrs. Temple will see to it that you are not left alone. Your meals will be brought to you. You will write to Lord Percival at once, accepting his offer, or I shall do so in your name. Do you understand me?" Eleanor stared, speechless, as her world narrowed to a single airless room. The Dowager swept out, her skirts snapping like banners of war. Within the hour, locks were turned on Eleanor's doors, and the windows were watched. Her only companions were Mrs. Temple, who hovered in gentle misery, and the endless echo of her own thoughts. Each day bled into the next, marked only by the tread of footsteps in the corridor and the distant clatter of creditors at the gates. Jonathan, too, felt the weight of exile. The moment the Dowager's decree was delivered, the steward met him at the service door, his face drawn with regret. "You are to leave, Mr. Harrow. The lady's orders. You are not to return." He gathered his belongings with numb hands, the unfinished plans for Ashcombe's restoration left behind on the desk. As he crossed the drive, he looked back only once toward the window, where once a candle had burned late into the night. Despair threatened to swallow them both, but love, once awakened, does not yield so easily. Marianne, loyal and quick-witted, became their lifeline. She slipped past the watchful eyes of the staff, concealing letters in the folds of her reticule. Eleanor's first note was breathless and raw. "I am watched at every turn. My heart aches for you. I do not know what will become of us." Jonathan's reply, written by lamplight in a rented room at the village inn, was equally desperate. "I will not leave you to face this alone. If there is a way, I will find it." For a time, hope flickered. Marianne smuggled words of comfort and defiance, risking censure and even her own reputation. But the Dowager, growing ever more suspicious, ordered the maids to search every parcel and inspect every visitor. One afternoon, as Marianne attempted to slip Eleanor a folded letter, a sharp-eyed maid seized it. The missive was delivered to the Dowager, who read it with mounting fury. That evening, she confronted Eleanor in her chamber, her voice trembling with rage. "You are as reckless as you are foolish. The whole county is laughing at us. If you do not put an end to this disgrace, I will see you sent to your aunt in Cornwall, far from Ashcombe, far from him." Eleanor's resolve did not falter, but her heart grew heavier with each passing day. Meanwhile, Lord Percival pressed his advantage. He visited daily, striding through the halls with proprietary arrogance. His proposals became more pointed, his threats more overt. One evening, as he cornered Eleanor in the morning room, her chaperone conveniently absent, he let the mask slip. "Your little affair has cost you dearly, my lady," he sneered, voice low and dangerous. "Accept my proposal, or I will see to it that every creditor in the county knows of your indiscretions. You will lose Ashcombe, your name, and your place in society. I have friends on every bench and at every bank. You cannot hope to withstand me." Eleanor met his gaze, steel in her spine. "If you ruin me, you will ruin yourself. No man will wed a woman you have publicly destroyed." Percival's smile was cold. "I would rather see you ruined than see you belong to another." As the estate's finances unraveled, creditors descended like vultures. Demands for payment arrived daily, each one more urgent than the last. The staff whispered in the kitchens, fearing the loss of their livelihoods. The tenants grew anxious, rumors of the estate's fall spreading through the village like wildfire. Jonathan, haunted by Eleanor's suffering and his own helplessness, resolved to act. If he could not protect her with love, he would do so with truth. He began to investigate Lord Percival's affairs, slipping into the village at night, questioning tradesmen and clerks, piecing together the web of debt and deception that clung to Percival's fortune. He learned of bribes paid to councilmen, of false promises made to creditors, of land seized by trickery and intimidation. His inquiries did not go unnoticed. One evening, as Jonathan left the office of a local solicitor, two of Percival's men followed him, their footsteps echoing on the cobbles. Jonathan quickened his pace, ducking into a narrow alley, heart pounding. He realized then that he was not only risking his own safety, but the last shreds of hope for Ashcombe and for Eleanor. Yet he pressed on, gathering documents, copying ledgers, determined to arm Eleanor with the evidence she would need to fight for her name and her home. Back at Ashcombe, Eleanor's world shrank further. Her windows looked onto the gardens where she and Jonathan had once spoken in secret. The scent of rain on stone was a constant reminder of what she had lost. Even Marianne's visits grew infrequent, as the dowager's suspicion grew. Each night, Eleanor pressed her forehead to the glass, longing for a sign lantern on the lane, a shadow among the hedges. All she found was darkness. It was Mrs. Temple who brought the final blow. Tearfully, she delivered the message. "The creditors are coming tomorrow, my lady. If the debts are not paid, they will begin to seize the estate. The dowager has locked herself in her room. Lord Percival is already speaking to the lawyers." Eleanor thanked her, voice steady, though she felt her heart shattering anew. She would not beg. She would not surrender, not while a single hope remained. And in the village, Jonathan waited for nightfall, the proof of Percival's corruption hidden in his coat. He knew the risk. But love demanded sacrifice, and the hour for courage had come. As thunder rolled over Ashcombe and the estate's fate hung by a thread, the choices of a few would soon determine the destiny of all. The first breath of spring brought no relief to Ashcombe Hall. The threat of ruin hung heavier than ever, and Eleanor's isolation had become complete. She paced her chamber restlessly, the silence pierced only by the ticking of the long-case clock and the distant, anxious voices of servants in the hall. The Dowager Duchess had not spoken to her in days. Letters from old friends went unanswered, and the world outside seemed determined to forget her existence. But Eleanor's resolve had only sharpened in the stillness. The stack of papers Jonathan had smuggled to her, the evidence of Lord Percival's corruption, rested in her lap each night as she planned. She read and reread them, anger and hope warring in her heart. It was not only her own fate at stake, but the legacy of every soul who called Ashcombe home. The opportunity came sooner than she dared hope. Lady Fenwick's garden party, a glittering event attended by the county's most powerful, would draw Lord Percival into the open. Eleanor sent word to Marianne, and together they orchestrated her reappearance in society. The morning of the party dawned bright and brittle. Eleanor dressed in the Ashcombe sapphires, her bearing regal despite the tremor in her hands. As she rode with Marianne to the Fenwick estate, villagers stared in awe and whispered prayers for her success. The party shimmered with the laughter of ladies and the boasts of gentlemen. Lord Percival, resplendent in a new coat, worked the crowd with oily assurance, basking in his reputation as Ashcombe's savior in waiting. His eyes narrowed when he saw Eleanor, but he bowed with feigned gallantry. "My lady, what an unexpected pleasure. Have you come to accept my proposal at last, or merely to beg for clemency?" Eleanor's voice rang out, clear and unwavering. "Neither, my lord. I have come to speak the truth." A hush fell as she withdrew the documents from her reticule. "These are records of your dealings with creditors, your bribes to councilmen, your false promises and threats. I have proof of every shilling misappropriated, every lie you have told to this community." Percival laughed, but a bead of sweat glistened on his brow. "You would slander me, desperate as you are? Who will believe you, disgraced as you are?" Eleanor turned, addressing the crowd. "I ask only that you read for yourselves. The evidence is here. I do this not for myself, but for Ashcombe and for every family you have wronged." She handed the papers to Lady Fenwick, whose eyes widened as she skimmed the first page. Murmurs spread. A magistrate stepped forward, demanding an explanation from Percival. He blustered, but the tide had turned. One by one, guests peeled away, leaving him exposed and sweating, his charm dissolving into panic. The scandal erupted before the sun had set. By evening, Lord Percival had fled the county, leaving only shame and unpaid debts in his wake. But Eleanor's victory came at a price. The crowd that had cheered her fall now recoiled from her defiance. "Unwomanly," whispered Lady Fenwick. "Madness," hissed another. The Dowager Duchess, white with fury, confronted Eleanor at the edge of the garden. "You have shamed us beyond forgiveness. You are no daughter of mine. Ashcombe is lost, and so are you." Before Eleanor could reply, her mother turned and vanished into the waiting carriage, leaving her standing alone in a sea of averted faces. The days that followed were a blur of heartbreak and humiliation. Letters arrived, not of support but of condemnation. Creditors pressed harder, emboldened by the Duchess's disownment. The staff whispered, uncertain whether to remain or flee. The doors of every drawing room in the county seemed forever closed. Yet in the darkest hour, hope returned in a form Eleanor had not dared to expect. Jonathan arrived at dusk, his coat muddy from the lane, his eyes alight with fierce pride. He found Eleanor in the ruined library, surrounded by boxes of unsorted bills and relics. "You did it," he breathed. "You faced them all." She looked up, exhaustion and relief mingling in her expression, "and lost everything in the doing." He knelt beside her, taking her hands in his, heedless of the dust and cobwebs. "You have not lost me, nor Ashcombe, not while there is breath in my body." Tears stung her eyes. "How can we hope to save it now? The debts are too great, and we are alone." Jonathan's voice was steady, full of conviction. "You are not alone. There are those who remember what Ashcombe means, the staff, the tenants, the villagers. They will rally to your side. And there is value still in these walls, in your art, in your story. If we must sell every last trinket to save this place, we will." That night, Eleanor summoned the household Mrs. Temple, Thomas, cook, even the gardeners and stable boys. With trembling hands, she explained the truth. The estate was days from seizure, but together they might yet save it. "We will hold a sale," she declared. "My paintings, my father's books, the silver everything that is not essential. I will paint commissions for those who wish to remember Ashcombe. We will not go quietly." There were tears and embraces, and to Eleanor's surprise, laughter. The villagers, learning of her plight, offered bread and coin, memories and comfort. The hall bustled with new purpose. Jonathan coordinated repairs. Marianne rallied neighboring families, and Eleanor painted by candlelight, her brushstrokes fueled by hope and desperation. The sale day dawned with the estate alive as it had not been in years. Neighbors came from miles away, drawn by loyalty and curiosity. Eleanor's portraits, landscapes of the estate, and even small watercolors fetched more than she could have dreamed. Jonathan auctioned off antiques, his calm authority reassuring even the sternest creditor. By dusk, the ledgers were balanced barely. Ashcombe would survive, though stripped of its old grandeur. In the quiet that followed, Eleanor and Jonathan stood together in the empty hall, surrounded by the echoes of all they had lost and all they had dared. "You saved this place," Jonathan murmured, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. Eleanor shook her head. "We saved each other." Outside, a new season unfurled, uncertain but full of promise, as Ashcombe stood poised on the edge of a new beginning, shaped not by duty or pride, but by courage, truth, and love. Yet beyond the walls, the world watched, waiting to see if hope and defiance would be enough, or if sacrifice would still be demanded before the story's end. The first days after the sale at Ashcombe Hall were marked by exhaustion and relief, a fragile peace that trembled in every corner of the old estate. Eleanor moved through her home with sleeves rolled, hair coming loose, ink stains on her fingers, and smudges of paint on her cheeks. Gone was the Duchess of marble composure. In her place stood a woman intent on building something new from the ruins of her legacy. Jonathan was ever at her side. Together, they mapped plans at the long dining table, poring over sketches and ledgers late into the night. Ashcombe's grand rooms, once echoing with empty ceremony, now rang with voices. Jonathan's steady, practical tones mixing with Eleanor's laughter and the hopeful chatter of the villagers and staff who had chosen to stay. The idea of the school came quietly, almost as a whisper. Eleanor and Marianne walked the dew-damp gardens one morning, the air alive with birdsong and the hopeful stirrings of spring. "We have space, and we have minds to fill it," Marianne mused. "You always said girls deserve the same opportunities as their brothers." Eleanor paused beneath the budding chestnut tree, gazing up at the windows of the once grand nursery. "Why not here? Why not Ashcombe?" Jonathan, when told, only smiled. "You taught me to see this place as more than stone and tradition. If you wish it, I'll draw every plan myself." Within a fortnight, the transformation began. The West Wing, where once shadows of loss and longing had gathered, became a hive of activity. Jonathan led a team of local craftsmen, removing rotted paneling and installing wide new windows to flood the classrooms with light. Eleanor cleaned and painted alongside the village girls, who would be her first students. Her hands raw, but her spirit undaunted. It was not easy. At first, the community watched in scandalized disbelief as carriages delivered books and slates, and young girls in plain dresses filed past the gates. The vicar's wife sniffed that no good could come of turning a noble house into a common school. Old Lady Fenwick declared she would rather see Ashcombe fall to ruin than become a cradle for radical ideas. But Eleanor met every whisper with calm resolve. She invited mothers to see the classrooms, let fathers inspect the new desks and the safe, airy dormitories. Jonathan's careful attention to every detail ramps for the smallest children. A reading nook beneath the grand staircase, a kitchen filled with laughter, and fresh bread won over even the most skeptical. Every day, Eleanor taught lessons in mathematics, history, and literature, her face alight with purpose. She read poetry in the gardens, conducted science experiments on the terrace, and shared the stories of her own girlhood spent among the books and corridors of Ashcombe. The girls, bright-eyed and eager, flourished under her care. Their laughter spilled from the windows, a music of hope that softened the hardest hearts. Jonathan, too, found new joy in the work. He watched Eleanor from the scaffolding, saw the way she knelt to tie a ribbon in a child's hair, or paused to explain a difficult passage in a book. In quiet moments, he joined her in the library, repairing broken shelves or designing a new classroom together. Their partnership deepened, the old barriers of class and scandal dissolved by shared purpose and gentle intimacy. In the evenings, as dusk fell over the grounds, they walked together through the gardens, speaking of the future. Eleanor confided her dreams of scholarships for the poorest girls, of lectures by visiting scholars, of a world where a girl's mind was valued as highly as her name. Jonathan listened, his hand brushing hers, his admiration shining in his gaze. "You see possibilities where others see only walls. That is your gift, Eleanor." "And you," she replied, "give me the courage to build them." Slowly, the villagers' attitude shifted. Families sent their daughters with pride. Merchants donated books and supplies. Mrs. Temple organized sewing bees for uniforms, and Cook taught the older girls to bake. Even Lady Fenwick, after much persuasion, allowed her youngest granddaughter to attend, grudgingly admitting that the Duchess's school is not entirely a folly. As the weeks passed, Eleanor's mother watched from afar. The Dowager Duchess, her pride still wounded, refused every invitation to visit. Yet word reached her of her daughter's work, of the children's progress, the respect she commanded, and the peace that had returned to Ashcombe. One crisp afternoon, the Dowager arrived unannounced, her carriage rumbling up the drive. Eleanor met her at the door, heart pounding. Her mother's gaze swept the busy hall, the lessons in progress, the laughter echoing from the classrooms. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, quietly, she spoke. "You have made this house a home again, Eleanor. Your father would have been proud." Eleanor's throat tightened, but she managed a smile. "You are welcome here, Mama, always." The old wounds did not heal overnight. But with each visit, the Dowager softened. She watched Jonathan with careful eyes. But when she saw the respect he showed Eleanor, and the love that passed between them. Her disapproval waned, replaced by a reluctant acceptance. The school prospered. The estate found new purpose. And as the last vestiges of scandal faded, Eleanor and Jonathan found moments of joy in the life they had built. One evening, as spring tipped into summer, Jonathan found Eleanor in the West Wing, now transformed into a sunlit gallery of learning. He paused in the doorway, watching her pin a child's drawing to the wall, her smile radiant. He cleared his throat and she turned, her eyes bright. "Jonathan, is something amiss?" He shook his head, stepping closer. "Only that I have waited far too long to say what is in my heart." He took her hands, his voice steady but full of emotion. "We have rebuilt this house together. I cannot imagine a future without you by my side. Will you marry me, Eleanor? Not for Ashcombe, not for duty, but for love for the life we have made, and the lives we will shape together." Tears glimmered in Eleanor's eyes, but her voice was sure. "Yes, Jonathan, 1,000 times yes." He drew her close, and they stood together in the place where their story had begun, hearts full of hope, the laughter of children ringing through the halls. Beyond the windows, the world changed. But within Ashcombe, love and purpose endured, stronger than scandal, richer than legacy, and braver than any dream Eleanor had ever dared to claim. Yet even as the bells rang out for joy, the future beckoned with new challenges and wonders, promising that their story, like Ashcombe itself, was only just beginning. Spring sunlight spilled through the stained glass windows of Ashcombe's small chapel, illuminating the faces gathered within. The pews were filled not with titled guests and society's elite, but with friends, staff, and a lively throng of girls from the school. Fresh flowers, picked from the estate's own gardens that morning, adorned the altar and perfumed the air. The modest ceremony was a world away from the grand occasions Eleanor had once been raised to expect. But as she stood at the threshold in a gown simple as hope, her heart was filled with a joy she had never imagined. Jonathan waited at the altar, his hands steady, his eyes shining with quiet awe as Eleanor approached on Marianne's arm. The girls gasped and giggled, clutching wildflower posies, their excitement contagious. Mrs. Temple dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, while Cook beamed from the front row. Marianne, radiant in blue, offered Eleanor's hand to Jonathan with a wink. The vows, spoken with trembling conviction, echoed in the hushed space. To love, to honor, and to cherish, as equals and as friends. The words were not just a promise, but the truth of all that had brought them to this day. When they were pronounced husband and wife, laughter and applause erupted, the schoolgirls tossing petals in the air. Eleanor and Jonathan's first kiss as a married couple was shy, then deepened with a tenderness that drew smiles and a few discreet tears. The Dowager Duchess, seated with a posture of pride and humility, pressed her hand to her lips, her eyes wet as she watched her daughter embrace the life she had chosen. After the ceremony, the celebration spilled out onto the lawns. Tables were spread with food prepared by the staff and students, pies and cakes, fresh bread, and strawberries from the garden. The air rang with music as Thomas played the fiddle, the children twirling in circles around Eleanor and Jonathan, who laughed as they were pulled into the dance. Marianne's joy was brighter than anyone's, for she had found love too, in the steady gaze of Ashcombe's new steward, Mr. Finch. The two of them danced together beneath the chestnut tree, their laughter mingling with the songbirds. The staff, once divided by suspicion and fear, now celebrated as family, their loyalty woven into every moment of the day. As the afternoon waned, Eleanor and Jonathan slipped away from the festivities, wandering the paths that wound through the gardens. They walked in companionable silence, their hands entwined, pausing now and then to watch the golden light spill across the fields and the school's windows, where the laughter of girls still echoed. "It seems impossible," Eleanor murmured, her voice soft with wonder, "that we should have come so far from where we began." Jonathan smiled, pulling her gently to his side. "There were days I thought I would never see this, never see you, free and unafraid, in your own home. I was so angry once," she confessed. "Angry at my father's death, at the burden of Ashcombe, at you for daring to tell me the truth." "And I was too proud," Jonathan replied, his tone gentle. I thought I knew what was best for you, for the house. I did not understand how much courage it takes to stay, to lead, to hope. They stopped beneath the old yew tree, the place where years ago Jonathan had first sketched Ashcombe's silhouette, and Eleanor had first begun to see him with new eyes. "What do you see now, my love?" Jonathan asked, his voice rough with emotion. Eleanor looked around at the lush lawns, the distant sound of girls reciting poetry on the terrace, the windows glowing with the promise of learning and laughter. "I see a home. I see a future. I see us together, making something new from what was nearly lost." He kissed her then, slow and reverent, as if sealing a promise not just for the day, but for every day to come. Dusk settled over Ashcombe, painting the sky in lavender and rose. The couple returned to the hall, their arms around each other, pausing to watch as the girls carried lanterns through the corridors, their faces lit with hope. Eleanor's mother awaited them in the entryway, her posture softer than Eleanor had ever seen. She reached for her daughter, embracing her with a trembling hand. "You have shown me what true resilience looks like, Eleanor. I am proud, so proud of the woman you have become." Eleanor clung to her mother, the last shadows of old wounds fading in the warmth of forgiveness. As night fell, and the last of the wedding laughter faded, Eleanor and Jonathan stood at the top of the grand staircase, watching over the house that had witnessed so much of their sorrow and joy. No longer just a monument to the past, Ashcombe now pulsed with life and promise, a sanctuary not of privilege, but of compassion and learning. Side by side, equal in hope and love, they faced the future. Their hearts, forged in adversity, beat steady and strong, their devotion a quiet, radiant flame. Beyond the windows, the world waited with all its uncertainties, but within Ashcombe a new story had begun, one written by their own hands, in trust, in laughter, and in love.